Hi there, folks. Thank you for joining me here on this Tea and Tones podcast, which, for whatever reason, is also going to be a video. I've not intended on doing this, hence the headphones. The reason for doing this was because I don't really do my own social media. It's such a weird um, thing to say when people see me online and they might access various bits of content, but mainly because I don't have a straightforward um, kind of direct way where I need to plug in all the time. Instead, I do it through several different guises. So I wanted to really touch on this channel, which is Substack, because I wanted to do, and I thought about doing a podcast, but then I thought I did one like last week or a few weeks ago, and then I was going to do it, but I got carried away with other stuff. I thought, oh, I've got X, Y, and Z to do. I noticed on Substack that I can't really share the screen, but I have a number of followers. If you're watching this and listening to this, please do hit the like button. Please do follow. It just shows me that you're listening. It shows me that you're interested. In my analytics, it does say that I have a number of followers. Actually, one of which, um, oh, darn it, one of which is Jessica Friday, who just looks absolutely amazing. And she reposted a few days ago on LinkedIn this thing that's from John Alexander. And this is of interest to you, maybe. So it's a podcast that he's talking about, which is really interesting. And he's just sort of saying how you're allowed to love humanity, but then so accept that people around you are doing good things and that there's a positive mindset that you sort of have to it. That's kind of what I took out of that. But he's also then saying, but no, we can do better. And what does that look like? And there's this, and what's interesting is Jessica's actually a well-being economist. So it's like, for me, it just feels like two different worlds that just came together in one there. Really interesting people online, but sometimes we need them pointing out, and I've done that sort of by accident. The podcast mentioned is Antidote. Imagine a world where, actually, I think it's called Screw This. Let's try something else, is what it's called. And I think it's by Antidote. So if you want to see what that is, then please do check it out. Um, in terms of my stats for Substack, really poor. I'm not necessarily doing this for anything other than just for the fun and giggles. What's interesting for me recently is that I feel like there's a value to TikTok. And I'm coming up with a report for the voluntary sector organisation I work for. And in that, I feel a little bit like I shouldn't have to do this, but actually I should have to do this because I need to be answerable to someone. We're a collective, so it needs to be thought out and what the plan is. But sometimes when you're a junior, you kind of still have that in you, and you still have that when you're older as well. Of why can't I just go off and do stuff? And there's a point to you not doing it. Is the point is to have intention. I think that's really more and more evident, really just important when it comes to TikTok, because I mean China is going to have a base in London, which was news about a month ago, and there was a whole kind of espionage chat around. Oh, we can't believe we're letting them be here in our country, and then so there's all of that politics stuff anyway. But that just kind of signals to me that TikTok has grown over time. There was a whole America issue, and there's a politics around that. Now there's a UK issue, but it'll still happen, and they'll be here, and people will still adopt TikTok. There's also this sense of passive income, and a lot more. There are far more YouTubers being born of a certain age, like particularly this Gen Z and Alpha. And I feel like with the rise of, I'm not saying the Green Party, I'm saying like anything green, loving the world around us, and since the rise of people like Greta Thunberg, now with the social online kind of creators that are the Gen Zs, it makes sense for them to not get a job in these other worlds that they're quite oppressive. It's not the same as working in the voluntary sector, and I think this new generation has potentially fallen out of sync with that because they want certain things and certain standards, and that's just not being met. I think TikTok is a great way to engage with that particular audience, but also a bunch of others that are, um, I would say, millennials even, who are quickly adopting. And there's other ones that are sort of older than the millennials. I don't know if you call them boomers, but they also have a huge markup because they're really skilled and knowledgeable. But then in adoption, they're just like, if you get the right person, they'll be less afraid of it, but they'll be like, yeah, I'm just going to embrace it. What I've found with TikTok is that embracing it by the young or the old doesn't really matter. It's something that they are doing. So TikTok is a relevant place to be. And I was going through thinking, I need to try to, I was juxtaposing myself a little bit, but essentially I was saying it is important because it's another content stream. In terms of SEO and omni-channel approach, so the way that um, Google ranks people and people have found on search is completely been split wide open. So it doesn't really, it's not there anymore. It's very different. If you want to know more, please like this video, leave a comment. I can talk to you specifically about that. But essentially, TikTok has to be an option. We're at that point. What's really dangerous is Blue Sky is also an option, and there are potentially other things there that people should be doing. A lot of the organizations are not. So that's really interesting because it has to be an omni-channel kind of approach. But also to be skilled at one. And I think that's where TikTok is really tricky. But if you're creating images and still images, that's fine because actually TikTok's boosted an algorithm in that area. And then I was going through this, thinking, oh, what do I need to do with this? I need to prove myself. I need to prove to others that as an infrastructure or as an organization, when you've got that B2B style, you can't just be delivering to human beings and individuals because you might not know them. But if you can engage and get rapport and reshare some things like you do on other socials, but with B2B style, then actually you're on a winner. You're forging together bonds and relationships, but you're doing that in real life. And then hopefully then by going digital, you're doing that through the strategy that you've got through social on your particular kind of social strategy. And when you're doing that, TikTok really kind of gets me a little bit because what's interesting is there are organizations there. They don't have masses of people following them. They're in the hundreds. The most might have 1,000 or two, and that's if you pick the right ones. But that's because we're talking about hyper localized kind of information or regional accounts. And there aren't that many people jumping on it in that sense, but there are lots of individuals. And this is where it's really interesting that those kind of demographics I sort of mentioned earlier are the ones that are driving that force of TikTok, but in a continued momentum way. I think some of the real selling points that um, if I had my way to sell everything and just kind of go, yeah, and why have I taken on TikTok? Some of my key kind of reasons would be the fact that sometimes we have content that is animated, it's moving. So that could be typography, but it could also be video. And when you get the IG reels and stuff, you can then inject that back into the system of TikTok. So I think using that is really, really useful. And also that the fact that you're getting your bank of videos on another area to reach those individuals, to then get the individuals. There's a really key basic thing that I'm sort of mentioning, which is individuals. There are far more individuals looking at content. Then there are organizations, because as I said, the organizations already do not have that many followers because they don't have a strategy to implement or a content creation kind of. So they just won't. Not even if it's still image, which is a bit of a mistake because that's where the creators are doing stuff. And actually, this way in which those generations might want to be more eco-friendly and savvy and say these are the right things to do, this is how we benefit our local or regional communities, that's where those people are. I can sort of get a sense of that, but it's different to other socials because TikTok actually has individuals, and I think that's the bit that's really tricky. The thing that I found really interesting looking at TikTok is that there are individuals there, but they are um, the organizations are there, but the people that would be driving it and generating that traffic to or generating contact would be people of influence and power. And actually, they're the ones that stand out on other socials as well. The only real difference here is that we're talking about difference in power with those that have, like, my role is really boring because essentially it's just, uh, it's not boring. It's really exciting for me. But if I had to video it, it would be just on a computer, and you would get a lot of jobs like that. And I think there are meetings to be had. I just think people that are more prominent, that get paid a heck of a lot more to run an entire kind of organization, that go out to lots of different things, has just this free stream that every minute of, and I think that's where that's really engaging. But you can curate a content in an organization where you have the bite size bits, and if you can do that as individuals, and those individuals do their content, and as an organization you reshare it, but pull together the videos to also push that through. I mean, that could work. This is a system of strategy that I'm discussing that already is there on Instagram. It has existed even in the days of Vine. There were these things, you know, and I think it's just interesting that people haven't jumped onto TikTok properly yet. When actually you've just got Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels then goes onto Facebook. Like they're the same. TikTok is the same as, so it's a no brainer in that sense. But to engage that, in particular the younger audience, to say, can you get involved with this, particularly in the VCSE kind of voluntary sector, social enterprise, it's really, really important for them to see the benefit. Now, this is where people get mixed up, is that Instagram, I don't feel like does that. I think it kind of does that, but it was born out of photography, really. So it's more like there's this facade to it. So I think people do a lot there and share. I just feel like the additional element that people don't do with YouTube is live streaming, but this is where TikTok really kills it. So actually, to have an event that is recorded and do your video bites, but also to live stream, could be done by some of these other platforms. But TikTok seems to be really taking off, and there's a huge gap in that market. But in general, there is a huge gap in the market, is what I'm saying, for regional kind of projects. So when you're looking at East Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, Midlands, Humber, and then not London, but different parts of. So those kind of areas and wedges of society are big chunks, but they're the ones that government will be devolving projects down to those levels that need to be then delivered on the ground. And I think all of this kind of devolution stuff is taking place in a very slow kind of way, but it's now drip feeding into pockets of mental health, like in the NHS, specifically in the NHS. So I think it's interesting to consider how video, as the running theme for this podcast, is the forefront of how we might choose to get our voices heard, to influence and to show in real time, look, this is what's going on, because you can't necessarily do it through other ways. And before people say, oh, YouTube is a thing, it's like, yeah, sure it is. But I go there and I go to AI for help on fixing things. If I want to fix my computer or my washing machine or a fence or learn how to build a website, I would do it through an AI tool or YouTube. You can't do that with TikTok. TikTok gives you small bite-sized information that's just really useful, and it kind of connects you and gives you an update because it's video based. But that should really lean into. Now, the only caveat to everything I've said is that you ignore everything I've said about TikTok, but you apply that to YouTube Shorts, because that is also a winning strategy, using YouTube Shorts to then lead people into the bigger chunk of a video. But I just feel like these are strategies that are being adopted by a digital world, and it feels almost like the digital world of entrepreneurialism and digital tech leaders that are not regional, they're more like international, are the ones that are really going for it, and they're making money out of it. So I've been talking for about 15 minutes now, and I'm aware that you're probably bored of the sound of my voice. But the last thing I'll give you is a kind of thought on everything that I've said is everything that I've said is technically American. Maybe practically, maybe like factually, is actually American. And with the rise of the Ukraine and Russia war, and then through Donald Trump's way of speaking, through other kind of nationalisms, sort of national identities emerging, Europe seems to be slowly, but slowly getting to create an identity of its own and embolden themselves to be the superpower, not just be a collective. And in that, they've already given birth to GDPR, and there's a law that passed around the standard USB, which wasn't helpful according to all of the research. So what they've done is decided that actually what they want to do is change it to a USB-C, which is the smaller, and that's a small detail, but that's now having a huge ramification for America and for Europe. Now, on the same footing, they are now keeping going forward and developing more and more, but thinking inside their EU, it's the Americans that still behave like that, but influencers, and we're buying their services even though they behave like, again, just Donald Trump, I guess. And it's just not on, is what they're thinking, but in a polite way. So they are now about to give birth to a whole ecosystem that is essentially Microsoft and Google and Zoom. And I think the Zoom video is the first one. And they've been given French and German government contracts. So different states and countries are actually buying into them. And I think it's France in particular who have said to their governments who are governing their country that you have got to use this, and the adoption rate has to be implemented. And I think they're in the swing of it now, and they've got a couple of years before they completely wipe out, 100% wipe out anything American. When you put that in context, the only lonely partner in that is the United Kingdom, who's right next door to Europe, but still buddies with America and buys all of its stuff. And I think that's going to be an interesting relationship. So there's a lot going on in terms of the politics behind why video marketing might be trending, but also why TikTok might be trending. But further afield, why actually using something like TikTok would be interesting because it's not American. But also, if there was a European version, then now is the time for a new social media platform to emerge, and it'd be really interesting. So that's my kind of daily thought process of stuff. I really apologize for if I've blown your brain a little bit and not had a solid strand, but the rough strand is about video and how these social media tools are utilized both on a national, global kind of scale, but also locally at a smaller level. If that's of interest, if you've enjoyed listening to this or watching this, then please do follow and like and share and subscribe and all that jazz. Let me know. Thank you very much. Until next time, see you soon.